Hello, and welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book.
And then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week, we finish our coverage of John Carpenter's 1982 horror classic, The Thing. Now, why don't we just wait here a little while, see what happens.
Welcome back, and this is part 2 of our Halloween special.
Yeah, the exciting conclusion to our conversation with Mike Arnzen about The Thing.
Yeah, we saved the best for last year. I really enjoyed where this conversation ended up.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We hope you guys enjoy it. There was a little bit of an audio issue that comes up in this second part, but it was still a great conversation. If you want to hear the first part of that was our previous episode, so you're going to want to go back and check that out.
So before we jump into part 2 here, we just wanted to take a second to talk to you about Audible. We actually have an Audible affiliate link, which is audibletrial.com/ink2film. So what you can do is sign up for that with our affiliate link, and you'll get 30 free days and 1 free credit for any book that you want in their collection.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and recommend our next project, which is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. You can go ahead and grab that audiobook with that free credit, and go ahead and get a sneak peek at what we're going to be covering next.
Yeah, I'm really excited because I've seen the anime and I love it. And I'll probably end up using Audible in order to listen to this story.
Yeah, I'm glad we're finally getting to some fantasy. I think this will be fun to try out that genre, and hopefully our listeners will enjoy it. Again, if you want to do that, it's going to be audibletrial.com/ink2film.
Okay, let's jump into part 2 of our conversation with Mike Arnzen.
Yep, we'll just be picking up right where we left off last week.
So next up we get MacReady's drinking and inspecting the garment, and somebody calls over the comm system that he needs to come get his stuff out of the storeroom because they're putting the remains of the creatures in there. And once he grabs his stuff, Fuchs wants to talk to Mac, and Fuchs is he's kind of also a doctor or a scientist of some sort under Blair, and he wants to talk to Mac outside in one of the tractors that they have. And I love MacReady in the scene because he's like, it's like 40 below out there, man. He's like, I'm tired. I don't want to deal with this. And he's just such a character. I love it. So Fuchs and Mac head outside. While they're clearing out the storeroom, George is left alone. Windows comes in. Windows is the comms guy who's been trying to contact the outside world. He leaves the room, and George is left alone, and we see, for the first time, the creature that's supposedly dead start to move underneath a tarp. When Mac and Fuchs are outside, they're talking about Blair won't come out of his room, and Fuchs has his notes, and he's saying there's notes of how dangerous the creature is and how Blair believes that there's still cellular activity, so it's still alive. And at the same time, tentacles are coming out and blood is dripping out of this body bag, and Windows comes back into the storeroom, and we get this crazy scene where George is like completely tied up by tentacles, and it's coming out of his mouth, and it's like moist over his whole body, and he's like vibrating.
I'm pissed on his behalf. How come you didn't come tell me about it? I'm sitting here by the damn thing. You know there's still cellular activity, and you go tell MacReady, not me. Like, come on.
Yeah.
This is also very similar to the scene with the melting ice in the novella, where the ice is slowly melting, and we get a hint that the thing is still alive, and like the eyes behind the ice are still like have an intelligence that's thinking or something, right? And this is kind of that scene for us, in the movie version.
It also totally distracts us from the thing that escaped in the previous moment when we
That's
saw
right.
it up through the ceiling. Now we're like, oh, it must have come down here to attack this guy. And it is the way you described him being laced up is really interesting. Like, it is almost like a boa constrictor kind of moment, and we get to see the power of these tentacles, not just to splay out everywhere and kind of lash and try to find escape or to murder somebody, but to methodically strangle somebody and all that. And the body bloats under the weight of that, and it's really sick. So it's like every time there's a chance for this body horror, Carpenter will surprise us somehow by taking it in a new direction. I really admire that. I think it keeps you watching, and you want to see what he's going to do next, no matter how gross it is or over the top. You're like, wow, if they did that, what are you going to do next? And
exactly. And I will say that when I was watching it when I was younger, I definitely viewed it with a different eye because, I grew up in a time period where there were like special effects that were somewhat computer generated. And so you see what they're doing and you're like, well, they can't do anything bigger than that. They can't top that, is basically was my mentality when I first saw this movie. And every time that he does. And I think it's incredible.
Yeah, and those are scene stealers. Whenever the monster shows itself, it's a scene stealer, and he just lets it play out. And it, in a weird way, it also relieves all the tension because all along we're so paranoid. Where is it? Who is it? And you just constantly have all this uncertainty until the body reveals the truth. And that's always what's happening in these movies that have monsters. It's the truth being revealed, and it allows us to catch our breath, but we're stunned at the same time. And this movie's ingenious. The way that the pacing of that in this movie really blows me away.
I kind of want to think about these. You almost don't think of them as like disease vectors, right? You have the thing that escapes through the roof. You have the person who gets taken in by the dog in that mystery shadow scene. That's a second vector. And then now you have the body that gets on the scientist as a third vector. So if we kind of track them that way, it might be interesting to see where they go and maybe theorize like how people got infected.
So Windows comes back to the storeroom, sees that George is completely covered in tentacles, and runs out to find MacReady and Fuchs. And they all run back inside, and of course the thing is gone. There's nothing in the room. They see that it busted out of the window, and they run outside into the snow to follow it. And we get this scene and I love this scene with the hands. We see his deformed hands and the scream that he lets out. So he falls, they catch up to him, and he falls to his knees, and they're all surrounding him. And he's just, this is where we see that the thing is effective one-on-one, but when a group is around it, it becomes, it's vulnerable, it's scared, it doesn't want to have to deal with all these people at once. So on his knees, opens his mouth, freakishly huge. He opens his mouth in a way that I don't think I could do, and lets out this scream that's so unnerving.
It's almost like a howl, too, more than a scream. It's some weird sound, for sure.
Well, I mean, if it just, was a dog before a man, maybe that's part of it. It's totally in like the werewolf as shapeshifter kind of modality. But for me, it reminded me of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is also like a similar text in a way, isn't it?
And also the 70s one, right? Because that's also a remake.
Totally. I mean, there's that iconic moment where Donald Sutherland just kind of lifts his finger and points and does that.
Oh yeah.
Belts out that wild, unworldly scream, and that's. I don't know which film came first. Maybe it must have been Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1972, is that what you said? I don't...
in the 70s, I'm not sure.
The Thing was what, 80, 82? Gosh.
82.
82, so a decade later or less. Yeah, I mean, surely Carpenter saw that.
And his fingers, like, I would love to pick your brain about this, Mike. There is an obsession, and I love it too, in horror movies with long, long fingers. Like, why is that so creepy to us? To put you on the spot,
The long hands, they're creepy. You're right. Well, I mean, it kind of in the movie, right? That's how the creature moves around with spider fingers, right?
Yeah.
And here to see that kind of insectoid look on the human being that's otherwise normal except for the bug eyes and maybe the open mouth. It's just those hands. And, I mean, right away, I'm imagining some analogs with technology. Like, technology is always called an extension of our hands. That's what tools are, right? They allow us to do more with our hands. So it gives the monster power to give it longer fingers, bigger hands, and things like that. And I think that makes sense in this movie.
Wow, I'm impressed. That was because Luke called you out there, and he was like, I was going to say, I'm impressed. Luke kind of put you on the spot, and you came out with something that I completely can get behind.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. While you were talking, I came up with my own theory, and it's more. I was thinking about how, like, if you think about the first person perspective we are in our bodies, the thing we see all the time is our own hands, right? Doing things, manipulating the world. That's how we interact with the world in a lot of ways. And so it's a very close thing to have transform. And so it's immediately something is really wrong if that appendage is out of proportion in some way.
Right. Well, just imagine if the character was naked instead of dressed at that moment. What else would be ultra long? I mean, its feet, of course, but it's like the lower extremities are the last to change. Is that what we're supposed to take out of this? Like the farthest away from the brain? You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
So, Body Snatchers, Invasion of the Body Snatchers was 56, and then also 78.
78. Okay.
Wow.
So they're all surrounding George, and he's on his knees, screaming, howling. And MacReady kicks over this barrel of oil and throws a flare down, and they watch it burn. They realize that they need to burn all of the remains because these remains had gotten to George and turned him. So they collect everything, burn everything, and Max sees, after everybody's left, after they burned everything, Max sees Blair running around the camp, and he was like leaving the helicopter. So he runs up and checks the helicopter, and it's been like pieced out. There's pieces missing. So they think he's trying to like put these helicopters out of commission so they can't get away. And so he chases after him. He's he's in the radio comms room, and he's kind of holding Windows hostage and taking an axe to all their communication equipment and totally isolating them at this point.
There's that axe.
So eventually all the men gang up and take down Blair, and they take him to the shack and they board him up and they isolate him there because they can't trust him because he's either going mad or he's a thing.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my question. Do you think he's a thing at this point?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so at all. I mean,
yeah, I don't think so either.
It's another instance. It kind of echoes what happens with the Norwegians who are shooting at the dog, just on behalf of the camp, but they don't realize it. The same thing here. He's trying to save the world basically by making sure that the camp can't leave, so that the alien can't leave the camp, kind of thing. And they don't realize it. He's screaming out all these weird things that just sound like Tourette's as he's hacking away at the computers, and it's one of those things where the intellectual is the villain at that point, but he's also like the hero that could save them, from themselves. And the movie is all about this physical violence that people resort to when they don't communicate. And that's what we're seeing, dramatized there, really. There's an interesting kind of, I'm sorry to skip back a little bit, but there's that interesting moment after they burn the body and they're all standing around it, after MacReady kicks over that fuel can. And, Carpenter sets it up so the whole cast is there quietly watching. And it's, you could say historically that's like a reference to Vietnam, where the monk burned himself and things like that. But to me, it's really stagey. It's asking us to really think about what is happening here. It's almost like ritual because of the way they're all standing surrounding this burning body. It has this real, I don't know what to call it. It's staged, It
also makes us wonder who in that group is a thing. Who can we not trust? Because we see them all in the same spot at the same time. And and I'm sure Carpenter gave them the direction of everybody act like you're the thing at this moment, so that the audience will have no idea who's who.
Well, and to get back to my disease vector, that's the end of that particular vector. So we have two others. We have the mystery man, and we have the thing that escaped through the roof.
Very good.
So yeah, Blair losing his mind here. This is also something right from the novella, right? And I think it's the character's also named Blair in the novella, who does a very similar thing and also gets locked up in the shack, and that plays out in a very similar way. And much like in the novella, in here, I don't think he's a thing yet. And at some point off page and for here off screen, he becomes a thing. And I'm not maybe 100% sure when that happens, but I'm thinking maybe we have to assume that the dog that escaped through the ceiling is the one that gets to him.
Yeah, I think so, because it's tunneled. I think we're supposed to infer, at least in my reading or my viewing of this, is that the tunneling is the thing that got away, and so it tunnels up underneath Blair and gets him, and then uses.
See, I thought he tunneled down into there. Blair did. Well, yeah, what did you think, Mike? Did you think that Blair tunneled down to make that ship, or do you think that something tunneled up to him?
Well, I told you, like, the whole tunnel thing came as a surprise to me at the end. I mean, it's built in to be a surprise, but I was like, wait a minute, how the hell? And maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe Blair was trying to dig his, great escape out through under the floorboards. Again, a war movie reference, right? But maybe it is the thing that's free, and it kind of cleverly found its way underground to that shack. I mean, it's hard to imagine how it could position itself to know to do that.
So we haven't got to the scene yet, but I'll skip ahead a little bit towards it just because we're on the topic of Blair right now. There's a part where they go out there and he asks to come back inside. He's like, you can let me out now. I'm okay now. And he's being kind of creepy, but he also mentions, like, I hear things out here, which is a very creepy thing to say. And that makes me wonder, is he a thing at that point? Because yes, he's acting creepy and wanting to come inside, but he's also talking about hearing things, which could be like the precursor to, like, he can hear the creature outside of his shack wanting to get in.
I'm not really sure which way to go on that. I think I like to think that he is a thing there, and he's like trying to like trick them into letting him out. But at the same time, if he's hearing stuff, it kind of makes me think that he's not. Like you said, it could be both. Either way.
And it works because he's like the smart one, so he can outsmart everybody, and they don't trust him because of his abilities to, convince and talk and all that. Like, he has power over. He understands more than they do, but they can't trust a word he says. Right? There's all sorts of weird things going on there with that paranoia of the scientific community and things like that. But Blair is smart enough to, he could be trying to work out an escape or something by digging underneath the floorboards. I mean, it's if he's possessed by the alien has his intelligence, right? I mean, so. You have to suspend the disbelief that it can learn how to talk and like everybody else, that it could really have the same human thought patterns as opposed to just the body.
Yeah, in the novella, that's explained as like an ESP power it has.
Yeah, well, we don't get a little goofy computer screen telling us that, in the movie. We just get the cell. So maybe the brain cell. But then you got to ask about identity and who we are and how we can do these things. So the movie requires us to suspend our disbelief about all sorts of things. And sometimes it just throws out red herrings all over, too. So who knows is the answer to that one.
Definitely. So once they take Blair to the shack, he's warning Mac. He's telling him to watch Clark, even though he's being locked up. He's like, watch Clark because he's kind of suspicious. He spent the most time with the dog. And after this, a few of them convene outside of the shack, and Dr. Copper brings up a blood serum test that they might be able to do. And so they go to this fridge where they're keeping the blood, and come to find out somebody had just gotten to it and it slashed all the bags of blood. The lock was undamaged, and the only people who had access to it was Dr. Copper through Gary giving Dr. Copper the key, and Gary, who is the commander. The crew all turn on each other in this scene because nobody knows who to trust, and Gary actually says, somebody may have taken the keys from me and just gotten into the fridge. Nobody really knows exactly what happened, but Windows loses it, runs down the hallway, and tries to grab a gun. And Gary doesn't let this happen. He runs down the hallway after him and holds him at gunpoint, tells him to put the gun down. Eventually he does, and then Gary realizes nobody can trust him at this point, so he puts his gun down that he was holding on Windows, and that's when Childs tries to take the gun, and MacReady steps in and says, no, we can't trust you, I'll take the gun.
Now, this is an interesting departure from the novella, because in the novella, they do the blood serum test, but then it's revealed that the blood that went into the serum was tainted by the thing, and then that's how they say, well, the two people who provided blood for the serum are Copper and Gary. One of them must be a thing. That gets simplified here into the who had access to the key. But ultimately, it's the same, right? Same two characters. And you're set up with the situation of one of them is definitely a thing.
Yeah, I mean, that scene also just serves a kind of obvious purpose, I guess. And that is that all their survival plans are being undermined, right? So the thing has this devious intent to like kill them off without even attacking them, right? It's trying to isolate them. It cuts the cables on the helicopter. It, ruins all the blood that might help them survive. So, like bit by bit, the resources get cut up by this creature, and it's very, it's using brain power as much as the physical threat, right? I mean, early in the movie, maybe it's close to this scene. They speculate that, if there are all of us around, it hides. But if you're ever alone with it, you're gonna die, right? So that's kind of like this communal bond where they should be like staying together all the time and never ever leaving each other's sight.
They should be. It becomes frustrating whenever they don't stay together, for sure. I wanted to ask, do you guys have a theory on who destroyed the blood?
I can't figure that one out. I really can't.
James?
I mean, we come to find out that neither of the accused. I think that somebody stole the keys, like Gary proposed.
Yep.
I think that's what had to have happened because both of those they had no motive. Neither of those two people had any motive to do it. So I don't know if I could say for sure who. I just think somebody took the keys. It's
got to be Palmer, right? If we're tracking if that was who got infected by the shadow scene, which I propose it was, and he's the one who gets revealed later, he had to have done what Gary said, which is lift the keys off of him and essentially frame them.
There is one other option though, and that is, I think it works chronologically, that Blair might have done it before he, was taken to the shack.
That's true.
I don't know. He's destroying everything else. Maybe he would have destroyed that. I don't, they say he doesn't have a key, but I find that hard to believe too, as a scientist and all that. So who knows?
Yeah, but right before this, he had been running around and destroying the helicopters and all that. But at the same time, the blood was also like pooling out of the fridge, like it had just been cut recently. Yeah. So I think
and destroying the helicopters hurts the thing because it keeps the thing from being able to spread. Whereas the blood it was a test, and so it helps the thing. So it's done for two different reasons. I think I like my Palmer theory.
You won me over.
So Mac now that he's in charge, he takes all the blood bags that were out there and they burn those. And he tells all the men that he knows he's not a thing, and he's pretty sure not all of them are a thing because they would all attack him.
This is proof that blood can be tainted and can be a vector for the thing. And they burn the blood, and I just want to remember this scene for later because I'm going to reference it again.
So Mac decides, since he's in charge, that he wants to sedate Copper, Clark, and Gary because they're the most likely to be the things. Mac records a tape while all of this is going on where he's kind of recording it for record, and he says the thing rips through clothes, and he's looking at the clothing, and nobody trusts anybody now. And I thought that was cool because he does this thing where he records nobody trusts anybody, rewinds it, listens to it, and then records something else right after that.
I thought he maybe even recorded over it.
Yeah, so did I.
Which was
I think you're right. Yeah, because he goes further back. I think that makes more sense, yeah.
Why do that, I guess, is it an open question.
Yeah, that is a good question. I don't know what his motives are.
And that kind of leads into us believing that maybe there's some sort of there's some turmoil in his character. It's starting to lead to us not necessarily trusting MacReady 100% as we had from the beginning.
That's true. It introduced that could be it on the part of the filmmaker, at least, to make us doubt whether or not we can trust MacReady a little bit.
Right. And, what I find weird about that scene, watching it over again now, that's the only scene we see him doing that, right? It's such a short little moment. There's not a lot of substance to it, except that kind of act of hesitation. He rewinds. We don't know really quite how far, what he's deleting, I think. It's a little ambiguous. But it certainly serves the notion that he's isolated and alone and doesn't trust anybody else. He can only talk to himself. And it's a moment of introspection that also shows that he's, a good soldier, so to speak, that he wants to leave this recording for posterity, that he's looking out for mankind, that he is heroic. And, even though we might not trust him in terms of the alien plot, in terms of the characterization, it kind of keeps him afloat as the protagonist so that we're going to trust him. And we'll find it believable when the rest of the cast trusts him. Because everybody else is losing it. Like
Yeah.
all their human
Keeping it
frailties.
cool.
Yeah, everybody else is freaking out, and So at one point, I forgot which character it is. Is it the dog Clark with the scalpel who threatens to
Yeah.
stab McCready
Yes.
lady later? I don't mean to jump too far ahead, but he just turns around and shoots him. But it's in the interest of the greater good. So all these moments with McCready are about, is he doing it for the greater good or not? And he is. So we have faith in him as like the last man standing at the end.
We want to trust him, yeah.
So while Fuchs is going over Blair's notes, he's like on his own, kind of going over the notes, and the lights go out, and he goes to check what it is, and a shadow crosses his path and keeps moving. And then he kind of chases after it, and in the snow he finds McCready's jacket with holes all in it, which is another instance of us not trusting McCready 100% because of information we've been given. Do you think that shadow was just the thing coming through? Do you think it was a certain person? Was it Blair?
It was Palmer.
I guess Blair couldn't have gotten it out.
I think it was Palmer.
Palmer. I believe it. I mean, the way that you're posing all this Palmer stuff, it makes me like next time I watch it, I'll again watch it differently and think maybe it was him all along.
Totally. I love that Palmer's like the stoner guy too. Like, yeah, he's like, man, or what is that moment where he's like, oh, I'll take care of it, and they're like, no, not you, and he's like, well, at least you thought about it,
Yeah, thanks for thinking of it though.
So he's like I don't know, I want to say almost like the irresponsible teenager character, but that's not quite right either. But he is kind of like, dropped out of it all. And it's interesting that he gets away with things because of that. So if he is the thing hiding in plain sight, that's awesome.
So Fuchs is missing now, and all the men go looking for him, and they split into teams, and certain people don't want to go with others because they suspect that they might be the thing. So I think Palmer doesn't want to go with Windows because he thinks that Windows is a thing, and it's just creating this tension and this turmoil within the characters. Nobody is trusting anybody.
Yeah, somebody says everybody watch whoever you're with real close. So yeah, that just adds to the paranoia, because like if you can imagine being in a situation where you're paired up and everybody knows that the person you're with could actually be a monster imitating a person. Like that's some extreme paranoia right there.
So McCready goes to Blair's shed and asks if Blair has seen Fuchs, and Blair has a noose in his shack now. And this is when you were talking about, he's asking to be let out. He's kind of begging to be let out. He's saying, come on, I'm fine now. I'm hearing noises. And McCready does this thing where he's like, kind of thinks about it, and then he's just like, we'll see, and shuts it behind him. After they leave Blair's shack, they find Fuchs' body burned nearby. And I thought this was really interesting because he seemingly was trying to kill the thing, or he accidentally dropped a torch on himself. And now, do you think that he was covered in some sort of oil, or are we just supposed to believe that the flare burned him? Just the flare burned him to a crisp.
I think Palmer killed him somehow. I think it had to have, right? Like I can't imagine. I mean, unless the dog escaped thing killed him somehow, right? It's kind of a mysterious moment as to what really happened to him.
Yeah. So McCready sees the light to his shack on, and I actually really like this moment because he's like, "We got to go up to my shack," and they're like, "Why do we need to go to your shack?" And he's like, "'Cause I turned the lights off." And they look up, and the lights are on. So they go over to it, and we actually get the perspective of the characters that are still inside the base, the main base, and only Knowles comes back. And he says that he cut McCready's line because when he was in McCready's quarters there, he found a tattered, torn up, with holes in it, jacket that said McCready on it. And he had pulled it out to show them all. So they were all like, McCready's one of them now. And some of them believe it, some of them don't. And this is a great moment where Knowles is on his knees kind of near the door, and the door just starts slowly spinning. Like the little handle just slowly spins, and then we push into the slowly spinning handle. And I thought that was great. It's such a horror movie moment. It's such a Carpenter moment because it's like kind of reminiscent of like something you would see in like a Halloween film, like his film Halloween. So next thing we hear is McCready busts into the storage room window in order to get back into the base, and when they finally axe down the door, McCready's holding Dinah a a bundle of dynamite with a flare, and he's like, I'll blow this whole thing up if you guys try to touch me.
So cool. He looks like a caveman or something, right? Like he's covered in ice and snow, and looks insane. He's got dynamite, and
it reminds me of
yeah.
It reminds me of Jack Nicholson from The Shining.
Yeah,
where he's like sitting and he's like frozen at the end.
Well, that's a later movie too, so maybe that movie. Well, actually, yeah. The Shining was later in '82, right?
I think it was 80.
I think it was 80.
Oh, okay, I was wrong. So interesting.
Yeah, it is, and sometimes those effects are like the same crew is working on the character across different movies, or they just happen to have more white dust that they can use in the lot. There's sometimes just practical, stupid reasons for the way that movies have the same kind of look about them. But
I'll take it as a reference. Like I would love it to be a Kubrick reference.
It's an homage.
Well, yeah, that whole moment that you're describing, where MacReady has the flare and the dynamite, and he's like totally desperate and alone. It's his strongest, and it's him at his weakest as well, because he's totally isolated, desperate. He'll kill the whole camp and all that. And we believe like he's really on his own at that moment. And it's the end, I think, of that arc of suspicion we have for him. That is, like the setup of the the broken jacket, and him recording himself and erasing it. It's like the end of that. And yeah, I mean, if he's the Thing desperately just trying to hold on for safety, sure. But it's so human, and it's so primitively human. Like Luke said, he's like at his caveman level that you don't question it. You're like, yeah, of course he's desperate to survive around not only the creature, but all these crazy people, that are paranoid and losing it. And I'm even thinking back to that scene with Blair where he shuts him in the shack and says, "We'll see you later." If we were suspecting MacReady at that moment, then the creature is keeping Blair away, because Blair's the only one who really understands it all. It's like, I don't even need to kill you, Blair. I just keep you in this little prison over here while I take care of the rest of the crew first. That's what's implied by that moment of the switching of the little door window at the shack. So I think at this moment, we believe MacReady for the rest of the movie that he's human. And in fact, I think in the follow-up scene, he goes, "I know I'm human. Now let's test the rest of you guys." He takes over as protagonist there, totally.
He's showing how capable he is there too, right? Like he has figured out the suspicion. He knows going in to the situation that everyone's going to be ready to kill him before he even opens his mouth. So he's engineered a scenario where he's going to get to say what he needs to say. So we immediately respect like how resourceful he's proven to be.
And what's funny is MacReady has now become the same desperate and willing to do anything hero that Blair was before, where he's willing to take out all the comms. He's willing to sacrifice everybody in the camp in order to make sure it doesn't get out. And that's kind of where we find MacReady in this moment too. So
brilliant.
So while he's holding the dynamite, MacReady is jumped basically from behind by Vance and Knowles, and he kind of brushes them off and pushes over Vance, and Vance falls over and starts having a heart attack, I think we're supposed to assume. And Knowles gets up close to him and realizes that his heart has stopped. And MacReady's like, go get Dr. Copper, untie him, and get him to perform CPR. And as they get him on a table, and Dr. Copper is giving CPR to Vance, and then his stomach opens up, and then Copper's arms fall into his stomach, and then a giant teeth-filled mouth closes around his arms, and his arms pull off, and he has stumps now. And
I love that moment. That is the best moment in the movie for me, aside from just the first time you see tentacles flying everywhere, and you're like, "What the hell?" That moment really, it surprised me. I think it surprised when I first saw it in the theater. Everybody in the theater, like, "Wow!" Like it is a total surprise, and it's timed so well so that like the paddles they work the first time, but it's the second time, and it just sinks right in. It's a moment of the unexpected, par excellence. It really is, and it's so over the top with those teeth. It's almost reminiscent of Jaws. It's like shark teeth that the stomach has.
Yeah, like a bear trap closing on his arms. I noticed, so I was also like, how is this scene so surprising? Because it's shocking. And I noticed that they essentially present three sources of danger in the scene. There's the dynamite in MacReady's hand, which he is like getting ready to blow up because they're yelling at him. They're having an argument at the same time. There's the Clark is standing there with the scalpel in hand, and we keep getting a shot of this scalpel he has hidden, and we know he has the scalpel and he's about to do something with it. That's the second source of danger. And then we see the CPR going on the table. And the CPR going on the table is by far the least, like, that's the least interesting thing going on in the room. It's the least threatening. And so that's the source that all of a sudden is the explosion of action. And it's so unexpected because of that. Like, our mind has been tricked into thinking the thing we're going to see is someone get stabbed or dynamite explode, right?
Yeah, and it's also like CPR is life-saving, not life-threatening, you know?
Yeah.
So it's the complete opposite of what you think is happening as well, along with those two, like, diversionary threats. So it's brilliant.
Now, the character who has the heart attack and gets his arms bit off, that has to be, or I'm sorry, not the one who gets the arms bit off, the character who has the heart attack and is a thing. That has to be the person who was with Blair, right? I'm not with Blair, with what's his name? The guy I've been saying is the thing the whole time.
Palmer.
Were they paired up? I wish I had noticed that. I wonder if they were paired up when they did that pairing off. I don't remember.
No, so Vance stayed behind to watch Dr. Copper and the other three that were tied up.
But Vance is a thing. He's the one who has the heart attack?
He's the one who has the heart attack and his stomach opens.
So when did he become a thing?
Maybe at the very beginning when the dog walked in. I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
I think I like Palmer. I think I like Palmer for that moment with the dog, like you've set up.
So maybe Palmer got to him at some point. Those two were together, and he got him. And made
I believe
him
it.
one.
We have to see. I should have tracked more closely.
Yeah, I'm just curious, trying to figure it out. You know, I wonder if it all tracks cleanly. I bet it does.
I think he was outside alone at one point before that scene too.
Yeah, and then the dog monster thing could have got him then too.
Yeah, whenever a character's totally alone out in the snow, they're always open to being taken over without us seeing it, right?
Yeah, because we know that there is a rogue thing out there. Yeah.
So as Vance like rips off Copper's arms, MacReady runs in and flamethrowers him, shoots him with a burst of flame, and that's when it like activates, and that's what you guys were talking about before, where the neck extends all the way to the ceiling and pieces and parts of it are falling off, and there's like a head comes. So I think what happens is the head comes out of the hole where the mouth was, and then also he has the normal head that's starting to sever itself. And there's like green tentacle things that are connecting all in the neck, and as it falls, it shoots its tongue out and starts dragging itself across the ground. And then it gets to the point where it's able to pop out its spider legs and a little like periscoping eyeballs come out.
Yep.
And then it almost gets out. It almost walks out of the whole room. And right at the last second, I actually think Palmer realizes it's there. And then MacReady blasts him with fire.
There's just a great scene I think it's the three of them. They're all standing there looking at the fire, and then out of frame, you see this thing kind of click, 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 come walking by them. And then they all like kind of at the same time hear it and turn around and go like, what the hell?
So in that scene where the head turns into a spider, and scuttles away, it cuts back to this reaction shot of Palmer, of all people, who we may speculate is the thing. And he says, "You gotta be fucking kidding me." And that is a moment where the audience usually laughs, because it's like the movie's talking about itself at that point. It's like they realize they've gone over the top, and that the film really can at any moment go to these extreme excesses of horror, and how the thing is limitless in its ability to transform into anything outrageous. So that there is room for humor as much as terror and horror and repulsion. It's like the thing could be anything, not just any person, not any identity, but any shape. And that's like just so unfathomable that our response is either complete freezing or terror or laughter, because you're laughing in the face of the abyss of what it possibly could be. And it's a great moment. It's a great moment.
So that scene also reminds me of Gary in the novella is talking about another character who was just revealed to be a thing, and he says, like he shook to his core. He can't believe this other character is a thing. Like it's so mind-boggling to me that this whole time he's been pretending, and he has this big soliloquy about it, and then the next paragraph is that he is a thing. So it's the same moment of like, oh, you got to be fucking kidding me. The guy saying it is a thing.
Interesting.
The head with spider legs almost makes it out of the room, and Mac burns it.
All right, so we had a little bit of a Arctic monster malfunction here, and it's we lost Arnzen for a bit, but we got him back. But he is on his cell phone now, so if the audio is a little weird, that's what's going on. We apologize, but we'll make do with what we can.
Perfect.
So at this point, Mac wants everybody tied up because they know they can't trust anybody, and what he wants to do is get all of their blood so that it can be tested. And what he realizes is that each part of the thing is its own thing that has its own will to survive. So what they do is they cut each person's thumb with a scalpel and take blood and put it in a little petri dish each. And then MacReady is heating up a coil with his flamethrower.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention, I think it's the character's Windows, I believe, who's doing all the cuts. At the last second, he walks up with the final petri dish, and MacReady says, "You too." And so he takes the scalpel that he's just cut all of these suspected things, he wipes it on his jeans to sanitize it, and then he cuts his own thumb. And I immediately was like, what? Wait, what? What did he just do? Because we've already proven that the blood can be a carrier, and that's how he chooses to sanitize it. I don't know how he's not a thing, and immediately at that moment. Did you catch that?
Yeah, I caught him doing that and wiping it, and I kind of thought of I didn't even think of the thing. I just thought of blood borne pathogens. I was like, oh no.
Yeah. No, but in particular the alien, he has just been cutting everybody's thumbs with the same scalpel, and this is apparently how he's sanitizing it. I think they're all things now.
Yeah.
I just think that's a moment where he is getting up the nerve, and he does something like a kid wiping his nose on his sleeve. It's like he's totally lost it at that point. And you're right that it's not sanitary, and it's a contamination moment, of course. But I think the audience forgets that.
So after everybody's tied up like this, he starts the test, and the first one he does it to is Knowles. And what he does is he takes the hot coil and puts it into the blood. And basically the theory behind this is that the blood is a thing of its own, and it will scurry away from danger. So he puts it in the blood and nothing happens. So that shows that he is a human. After Knowles is confirmed to be human, MacReady's like, let me show you what I already know, and cuts his thumb and tests his own blood, and he is not. He is also a human. And then we move on to...
They also test the bodies.
Yeah,
I think that's next, actually.
Yeah, they test the bodies of Clark, who had lunged at MacReady and was shot in the head, and then also Copper, who had his hands, ripped off by that stomach monster.
I did want to mention in this moment, it's proven that Clark was a human and that MacReady shot him. So this is our proof of human-on-human violence, and this is what we had talked about in the novella that I kind of felt was a missed opportunity, and that's brought to the movie, and that's the idea that the paranoia can lead to a mix-up and cause kind of collateral damage outside of just the thing itself.
The next thing that happens is Palmer's blood is tested. When he puts the coil into the blood, it jumps out and reacts, and it's extremely iconic. And I think what people think of when they think of this movie is that moment when the blood jumps out and squeals and makes noise.
It makes this noise like a little animal getting its tail stepped on or something. I don't know. It's really startling.
Yeah, it reminds me of those novelty games with a jar of peanuts or something like that, and you open it up and a snake pops out of it. That moment reminds me of that. It's a real Jack-in-the-Box kind of moment there, because you don't expect something that's liquid to take solid form, and it just springs out, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I noticed in that scene they're also kind of interrogating Gary a little bit and saying oh, I'm going to save you for last because we all know what that's going to show. And so they're also misdirecting you in that moment, again, making you focus on Gary and what they think he's going to be. And then, the misdirection is they're actually doing a test on Palmer. And I don't know if any of you noticed it, but right before the test of Palmer, it goes to him, and he does this look like, well, I guess I'm caught. But it almost goes by without you even noticing it. But he makes this like funny look on his face.
Yeah, and then the next time we cut to him, he's like, his like face is boiling and like bubbling off of his skull, and he's like vibrating and jumping.
Yeah, and this scene comes back to that, like Mike was saying in the dog scene, in that now all of a sudden they've created a scenario where two people are or two or three people are tied up with a thing, right? And they're tied to it, and they're all trying to get away, and it's this crazy moment, and they're all trying to escape, but they can't, and they're tied to it. And it's like those dogs trying to chew their way out of the cage, right?
Yeah, it's totally dramatizing that sense of there's no escape from the thing, and but at the same time, the thing doesn't seem to know how to escape either. I mean, like you said, his face is bubbling up and it's transforming, but oddly, it doesn't know how to escape from ropes. I mean,
it's really chaotic, right?
Yeah. So anything could happen, but there, like, everybody's constrained, and at the same time, MacReady's trying to light his flamethrower, and it's not working.
Oh yeah,
it's like this is such a frustrating moment for him and for the audience, because it just feels like a cheat to suddenly it doesn't work, you know.
And it goes on for so long. This is the car not starting, right? Isn't this the same thing?
Exactly.
From like all horror movies, right? Where the person gets in the car and like the engine won't turn over.
Or the reload and fumble. So Palmer's like head splits open and like bites onto windows, and he's like flailing him around and like slamming into the ceiling, and he's like, it's just like, this is when you see like the full power of the thing, and like it's like physical prowess, because it's like it like at one point it like jumps on the ceiling and then like jumps down, and it's like flailing a human man, a full grown man, and it although it doesn't like to go and fight, it likes to be secretive. It absolutely can fight.
Yeah, it's fearsome in this moment, right? Yeah, it's terrifying, and the fact that the flamethrower won't work gets Windows killed.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole like flailing the guy upside down out of its mouth, it's almost like a dinosaur eating a caveman kind of moment.
Yeah.
So
great scene.
Finally, MacReady gets his flamethrower to work, and he torches Palmer, and then when he like leaves, because Palmer is like the thing at this point is not Palmer anymore, but he runs out into the snow, and MacReady chases him down and then throws a stick of dynamite at the flaming body and blows him away. And then as he comes back in, Windows is already turning into a thing as well, so he has to torch him. So that's two people gone, and then
that shows how fast it works, right?
Yeah. So the only people who are left who are tied up are Childs and Gary, and both of them are suspected, especially by MacReady. MacReady doesn't. I don't know if he like really likes Childs. Like it seems like there's like this antagonistic thing going on where he doesn't really. I don't know. They don't really love each other. So basically, he's like, I'm gonna test your blood right now and find out that you're a thing. And when he tests it, he's not a thing. And then Childs is like, now, like cut me loose. And then the same thing happens with Gary. They test Gary's blood, and as they go to touch it, it does not jump out. He's also a human. And then one of my favorite moments of the entire movie is when Commander Gary is like, I know you gentlemen have been through a lot, but when you find the time, I'd rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch. And he like freaks out. And that's one of my favorite moments.
He's like, he's wearing a military style uniform and all that. He's older. He looks like, a colonel in the army or something. And I mean, that's like the authority right there. It's been constrained, but right all along. It's asserting its authority, saying you should have trusted me. And I don't know if you're reading like a war or military theme through this movie, I think that's a interesting moment of, the boss was right all along kind of thing.
It also is a subversion of what happens in the novella. Because in the novella, Gary is a thing, as I just mentioned earlier. He has this soliloquy about how he can't believe that this other guy has been a thing all along, and then it turns out he is. And so in the movie, when he isn't, if you were familiar with the source material, it would be a bit of a surprise, I think.
No, I mean, I guess I just had the thought that, it's interesting that happens at the moment where MacReady loses control of his technology. He can't get the flamethrower going and all that. But it's like, it's a leadership issue too. Like everybody is constrained when there is no leader, and it adds to that feeling of chaos that you were mentioning before, James. It's not just that they're trapped with the thing like right next to them, but that there's the order is gone. Like they've gone through this orderly process, and yet that's when the movie is at its least, least controlled. It's like nothing's working right. McCready's lost control of his flamethrower, and the chaos wins.
Definitely. So at this moment, McCready, Knowles, and Gary all realize they're basically the only ones left at this point, other than Childs. Childs is left in to basically keep watch over the main base, but those three go to Blair's shack.
So frustrated at this moment that they leave Childs. Why in the world did they do this? As soon as they walk away, I immediately thought, okay, well, now Childs can't trust any of them because they could all get transformed. You can't let anyone out of your sight, damn it. You have to stay together.
Yeah, it's kind of, after all that they've been through, it's kind of interesting that they decide, it's unbelievable because I feel like this wouldn't happen. I feel like two people would stay behind, right? Two people would go, two people would stay behind.
You just can't, crazy things do happen, and especially in like scenarios where everybody is on edge. So it could happen, I think, but it's certainly not a smart thing for them to do in any stretch.
So they get to Blair's shack and they find that the door is open and there's loose boards on the floor that lead to this tunnel that we've been talking about that have been dug, and it leads to like a workshop area where the thing has been building a ship to escape, and it had been stealing parts from the helicopter.
Yeah, and they say there's a line there where they say something like, "Oh, he's been busy out here." So the implication to me is that that Blair is a thing, and that at some point he became a thing, and then he went down and started building this. This is a direct thing from the novel too, right? Where instead of a anti-gravity device, is what the creature's making in the book, he's making a ship, which might be even more unbelievable. I don't know. But it's another, like, it's the idea that this creature is ghastly and as much of an abomination as it is, has retained some sort of advanced intelligence and is able to create a spaceship, right?
Yeah, and maybe it has something to do with his intelligence as well. I don't know, because he was the smartest of them. Yeah, Blair's intelligence.
Just briefly, I guess, the alien has to have superior intelligence to have a spaceship to begin with to get there. So it's just something we forget about. It's in the opening credits. We forget all about that, and so it makes sense logically, but it almost comes out of nowhere because our attention has been focused on the organic kind of nature of this crazy shapeshifter, and just all the horror that the science fiction stuff comes almost out of nowhere. So when they first show that spaceship underground, you're like, no way he built that all in this short period of time.
Yeah.
And what's funny is, like, at least in the film, the spaceship was kind of established for the audience, whereas in the novel, it's just like at the end. I mean, the spaceship is established, but there's also other future tech like the anti-gravity harness thing that's not really set up, and then it's just there at the end. It's believable. There's some
because sort of engine that he's built, I think.
Yeah, like an atomic energy engine that can power anything, seemingly. So Knowles is keeping watch over the kind of grounds outside of Blair's shack, and he sees Childs running through the grounds, I guess, and they react to this and they're like, what is he doing? And basically they're like, he must have seen something or something. So they decide to drop the dynamite that they were rigging. They're rigging dynamite in the shack, and they drop it down into the warehouse area. And then what they do is go through the entire complex, and basically what they assumed had happened is Childs or the thing had turned off the generator of the entire complex because the power had gone out. And so what they decide to do is they're like, if it destroyed the generator, we're all dead anyway, so we need to heat up we need to kill it, basically, before we freeze. So what they do is they go through in this last-ditch effort, and they're throwing, like, Molotov cocktails into each room and then throwing a flare after it. So lighting up the entire complex room by room, systematically going through, and then they end up at the generator room.
So it's kind of a suicide pact gets made here, and they say, none of us are getting out of here alive. We need to light this whole place up and try. Like, they all kind of agree that they're gonna sacrifice themselves to kill the thing here.
Right. Yeah. It's suicide pact is a great phrase for that. And that's kind of what they do. And they've given up hope, really, but they live on, to do something heroic. And that is it is a like, once again, it's like a war movie kind of ending. Like, we'll do it for the greater good and
Right.
be self-sacrificial martyrs and all that.
So they're in the generator room and they're laying dynamite to try to blow the rest of the place from underneath, and they kind of split off in their own little areas that they're setting up the dynamite, and Gary goes off into a corner, and then from right behind him, Blair pops up and puts his hand over his face and starts to meld into his face, starts to like meld into his face. His fingers start to, I guess, tentacle into Gary's face. And then
huge tactical error. They all decide to go off on their own. Come on, stop it.
So Knowles is kind of off on his own as well, and we don't necessarily see anything happen to him, but as he walks away, that he like goes off into the shadows, and Mac realizes that he's on his own, and he gets up and tries to start walking towards where Knowles was, and this is when we get kind of this like wave from under the ground, this tunneling of the thing that like knocks him flying, because he's underneath like these floorboards basically, and he's just like clicking along them and sends him flying. And then we get this like showdown between Mac and the thing.
So before we get to that, the Knowles thing is really weird. Like he hears something something going on over where Gary has been, and he decides he's just going to walk off and investigate without telling MacReady, who's right behind him. So it's again like a lack of communication, like what Mike was talking about, is like a big problem in this movie. And if they had just talked to each other and stuck together, so many of these things could have been avoided. And instead he walks off and then disappears, and we never see him again.
Yeah, and just think of the range of sizes that the thing has. 1 second it's like reduced down to Blair thing, if we can call him that, to his hand muffling as Gary by sticking the tentacles into his face and covering his mouth. But at the same, what is it, 2 minutes later or less, we have this giant underground wormy thing that kind of comes after MacReady in the cavern. And part of me is thinking like, what? Like, if it's that big, why didn't it just attack the whole camp to begin with? And is this how the tunnels were made? And wouldn't they have heard it? I mean, the realism just goes out the window for me at that point. I mean, I really have problems with the whole underground tunnel stuff in this movie, but it's still it's free to go over the top. I mean, once they start destroying everything, it's like the film is destroying its own logic and just saying, let's just be done with it,
Yeah, I mean, I think they do kind of hand wave the tunnels a little bit by saying, like, let's go down to the generator area or something. And I guess that's what these tunnels are supposed to be, like a pre-existing tunnel system that we just haven't seen up to this point. That was my read of it.
That makes sense.
Yeah, well, and then they go...
The thing is also like underneath the generator room, though. So there's seemingly other tunnels that are underneath him as well, so that were also dug.
Yeah, and my theory is the big thing that comes out is the dog one. And my suspicion is that we're supposed to assume all along, because it absorbed multiple dogs maybe, and maybe a couple people too, that's why it's able to be so big, and it's been down there like building strength throughout the movie. And because this is our first, because when it pops out, which we're about to get to, like it has kind of a dog look to it, right? Like it has this big, almost werewolf-like jaw to it.
Well, yeah, I think it almost has like a dog coming out of it also. It's like, it's definitely the dog that we had seen escape earlier in the film.
So if that's the case, then that means that Blair and Gary, potentially, and possibly also Knowles, all three of them, those three vectors, if you will, they all run off and we don't know what happens to them. So yeah. I think that there's a huge opening for this movie, for like if we're talking about them wanting to make another movie in the future, there's so many ways that this thing could have survived.
Yeah,
sure.
Not even talking about the final two. Yeah.
The showdown between Mac and the thing the thing that had knocked him over bursts out of the ground, and like you said, it has dog-like features, and he kind of rolls away from it, grabs a stick of dynamite, and like lights the dynamite, throws it at it, and then just gets the heck out of there. And it seemingly sets off a chain reaction. blowing the whole
he
complex
stops
up.
for a moment holding a piece of lit dynamite to yell, "No, fuck you," or something like that. And it's like a kind of a funny moment, but that to me is another borderline. I don't know if someone would actually do that while holding a lit stick of dynamite. It seems rather foolhardy.
Right. Yeah, it's a transgression of genre too. It's like something Rambo might say, or something. You know, it's like from a different genre altogether.
From an action movie.
So sure, yeah, and it is comedic, but maybe just because it's so out of place. But the film just kind of keeps opening up the door to impossibility over and over and over again, to the point where it's preposterous and anything really does go at the end. You know, the creature, like there's a film theorist, maybe you've heard of him, Noel Carroll. He has a book called The Philosophy of Horror, and he talks about monsters as being generally one of two types. That there are, I think, 5 or 6 in his theory. They're either fission figures or fusion figures. That is, that like a monster is either like a body part that separates from you and does its own thing, like a dismembered hand, or it's a fusion of two completely opposite categories of biology. So like a wolf man, that kind of thing. And the creature in the thing is like a fusion of everything biological that it touches. So it becomes this crazy, chaotic beast. It's like a fusion chaos figure, and it just, the more it happens, the less believable it becomes. So I think Carpenter smartly kind of resorts to familiar genres to help contain this story somehow, and then it ends up being like, you know, what they would call like a Mexican standoff at the very end because of that. It's like it shifts genres at that moment, and you know, so we get the relief of the big showdown, and the creature is blown up. But it never really is, and the ending is just really interesting to me.
So getting into the ending, Mac kind of like hobbles out of the rubble of the complex, and he like finds a spot to sit, and he has like a blanket around him, and he's got his whiskey, and he like takes a seat, and while he's sitting there looking at the carnage and all the flames everywhere, Child shows up with a flamethrower. And he walks up and he's like, "Are you the only one who made it out?" And Mac is like, "No, obviously not, because there's both of them." And it's just this very interesting conversation that they have here, where it's like, Childs is like, "How are we going to get out of here?" And Mac is like, "Maybe we shouldn't." And they're kind of coming to grips with, I think each of them is showing that like they think the other one is the thing, and there's no way either of them are getting out of the situation. So why not share this whiskey bottle that they have, share a drink, and kind of just laugh about the situation and kind of the futility of it, I guess.
How do you guys feel about this ending? I guess before I get your takes on it, I want to say that to me, I don't know that I like it, because to me it feels almost like I don't think that MacReady in that moment would trust him. It feels like he's done so much to try and ensure that the thing gets destroyed, and he's already killed a person. I feel like he roasts him in that moment. I don't know. Maybe that's what happens after the credits roll. How did you guys feel about that final scene? Did you like it?
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed it. So you're saying that you don't like it for the fact that it's like he ultimately failed in the fact that he didn't even really kill the thing, and it seems like a victorious moment, but it's not?
It feels like a surrender on his part, because he's allowing the chance that the thing escapes, when it feels all along to me like he was unwilling to do that.
I can see that. Or
because
maybe at the end,
the thing's not going to freeze to death. They already established that the thing wants everybody to freeze because it'll eventually get thawed out and survive.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many possibilities to that kind of open-ended resolution. I mean, they both could be things, just having a drink or something, you know.
Yeah.
But my read on it is that maybe, I mean, like we've seen this in movies before, like two big burly guys get in a fist fight and they just exhaust each other and just, you know, like help each other stand up and, you know, kind of breathe and laugh at or something, you know. Like it's like the end of the battle, the last two standing kind of have this moment of, I don't know what you would call it, valor before the end. They give up trying. So there is a defeat there. But there's also, like, it is communication if you think about it. Like, if all throughout this movie, there has been this issue of people not communicating properly and having the existential crisis of not being able to really know what another person is thinking or who they are. And, the alien is us all along and all these things. It ends with this moment, which I think I prefer to read optimistic, which is, let's just talk. Let's be human for a second, And I think it's implied, like, by passing a bottle, that this is a human act, and only a fellow human being would drink, and kind of enjoy the moment and not be so preoccupied with just surviving and growing. So, maybe just keeping that distrust alive is what keeps them alive. You know what I mean? Like, they know they're going to die in the Arctic chill or the Antarctic chill. So to them, it's just, maybe they both are survivors, but having that mutual distrust keeps them human and alive. Am I reading too much into it?
It's almost a trusting moment if you put it in that light, because it's Macready and Childs both willing to trust the other person enough not to just roast them right then and there. So you're right. Maybe it is kind of a positive moment, unless you want to look at it pessimistically and say that their trust is going to get them killed and make the thing live on.
Yeah. So, like, the creature knows it's one, and it doesn't make a difference. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I tend to agree with you. I think that it's more of a. I tend to think of it from a positive standpoint. Like, I've always looked at it as, like, it is an ambiguous ending, but for me, I've always thought they were both humans in that moment. And it's funny because it kind of reminds me of the ambiguity of, like, the end of Blade Runner, where it's like which was the last project that we did, and it's kind of that. I like these more ambiguous endings that people were daring enough to do.
The 80s version.
The 80s, yeah, 80s Blade Runner, sorry. 82. And I like these endings that are more, they make you think a little more, rather than, if Macready had gotten away. It's
interpretive, right? It's up to you to decide how you think it actually is.
Exactly. And actually, in comparison to Blade Runner, there's something interesting that I wanted to bring up that I guess I'll just throw in now. Blade Runner and The Thing actually came out in theaters the same exact week in 1982.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and also, I just wanted to tell you about June of 1982 very quickly. This is I believe in order, the releases in June of 1982. Poltergeist, Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, and then Blade Runner and The Thing in the same week.
Wow.
So that was just like 1 month in 1982. I can't even, all of those movies in theaters all at the same time.
Yeah, I think I saw them all in theaters around then too. Khan was particularly hilarious. But yeah. This was a dark movie compared to those, though. This is a real. The ending is so ambiguous. And, is it critiquing the, like? All right, rugged individuality wins in the end, right? Like, Macready survives alone, that kind of thing. But at the same by the same token, it's not really proven that he survives, and it's like it's this concept of man against nature, where nature's going to win no matter what. So it's really raising these philosophical issues. You could even read it like in terms of race, like it's a black man and a white man having this kind of like distrust and yet agreement to get along until the very end, kind of thing. So, like, what does that say about race relations in the 80s? Like, where were we then? And I just think it's, and then maybe even going back to that masculinity idea that, this is a macho kind of ending, to the tough guys survive and they kind of swap a drink and, get swaggerly with each other. And, you're left with male bonding that's empty. And it is not going to survive. So, like, you can read so many social issues into this, whereas Poltergeist, is goofy compared to this. Like, the ghost story of Poltergeist about little children being, sucked into the spiritual world through the TV. That's almost child's play kind of thing.
I like that. I think this is the superior film in my opinion. I think we need to end it here. I think we've said everything we can say, and as much as we can. Before we end, though, I wanted to ask Mike in particular if you have any additional like general thoughts about John Carpenter, where this movie stands in his filmography, and maybe lasting impact of this movie kind of historically in the genre.
Wow. Well, I mean, historically, this is a big one, and it's, like one of you guys said earlier, it might be one of the best horror remakes ever. I mean, it's just it takes so many risks. It's like one of the best non-CGI and one of the last non-CGI horror films made that just totally celebrates the creative capacity of these special effects guys that were working on, the monster suits and all the technical, physical representations of monstrosity. So, like, cinema goers back then really would believe these things because they were like more organic, more physical, more analog, and so it had a real appeal to it that in some ways is lost now. And so Carpenter should be, this movie specifically should be heralded for that as an example of the kind of greatness of that kind of cinematography, or I'm sorry, of cinema really, before computers took over and assimilated it. But as far as Carpenter goes, I mean, he's always dealing with these philosophical issues and going over the top moments that often bend towards absurdity and comedy. And, he kind of has this tongue in cheek because I think it's a sort of like a paranoid worldview that doesn't trust man's claim to greatness ever. A lot of his movies, I think, are challenging that notion that man and science and all of the things that might make us valorous and heroic really are what we claim them to be. There's always something that's out to undermine us, including ourselves. I can't remember which movie he did right before this one. Was it Christine?
I don't know.
Was it? It wasn't Halloween.
No, Halloween was a bit before it. And this movie didn't do necessarily great at the box office. I don't think it did actually particularly well, but it's obviously had an amazing cult following, and people, like you were saying, people will herald this as one of the greatest horror films, horror, sci-fi, horror, mystery films ever made.
Well, hearing what it was going up against, I guess it doesn't surprise me too much.
I mean, yeah, I think E.T. ended up being the highest grossing film of all time at that point. Up to that point in 1982, it was the highest grossing.
I mean, you got Blade Runner coming out at the same time. That's probably another reason why Blade Runner is winded up being a flop in the box office.
All I'm going to say is rated R horror films are always better than PG films. Because they have license to do this kind of stuff that Carpenter does, which is go over the top, it's more free to come at you in different angles, and they're not going to be censored as much to protect the children and such. E.T. is the direct opposite of this movie. It is the domesticated alien in your home who's a happy brother or something. It's not. Here we have the alien in the camp that's the total enemy within. So they're complete opposite movies. And sadly, the more philosophical genre films, the more rated R and taboo films that might have downer endings, they never get the mass audience big box office.
We are seeing that today as well.
Yeah, they always generate a cult following, though, because people think about them and they realize the value of them and they want to keep them alive.
Speaking of cult followings, the film that he directed before The Thing was Escape from New York.
Oh
yeah,
Kurt Russell.
Another Kurt Russell movie. Yeah. All right, well, I think that's a great place to end the discussion. I want to thank you, Mike, for coming on. It's been a pleasure. This has been I think a really fun conversation that we're happy to have.
Hey, I am honored that you invited me to be one of your first guests, and this movie really stands the test of time, I think, because it takes creative thought to try to outwit the alien, and the alien is so, as scary as it is and how over the top it is when it's in transition in the movie. It's really an imitator, right? So The Thing is about man's ingenuity, really beating out imitation. And Carpenter is really making a point here about cinema, I think, by taking Kurt Russell out of Disney and putting him into these movies that are over the top and crazy, but so much fun, entertaining think pieces that, he's celebrating the creative imagination on the dark side.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming on. If people wanted to follow you on social media, maybe find out where they can get some of your books, check those out, where can they do that?
Well, I've been running a website called gorelets.com, Gorelets, for years, but I'm really active on Twitter. I think that's where I do a lot of my communication. So my Twitter handle is @Mike Arnzen, Arnzen, and anybody that follows me there can, link to other things and such. And of course, there's michaelarnzen.com, which has connections to all sorts of websites. I always have new things coming out in different anthologies and online websites, as well as single title books. I'm working on a short story collection right now, and also an academic study. So, if people just sign up for my newsletter or check me out on Twitter, I think they'll always be up to date, and I hope people check it out.
Yeah, absolutely, they should, and we hope that maybe in the future we can have you back if we have another project that makes sense, because this has been a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot, Mike, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thanks so much, Mike.
Right on. Thank you, guys. See you later.
All right, thank you so much to Mike for joining us and talking about The Thing. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, totally agree. Anytime you want to come back on, Mike, just let us know.
Absolutely. And if you want to connect with him, you can follow him on Twitter @Mike Arnzen, Arnzen. And you also can go to his website, gorelets.com.
And if you wanted to find us anywhere else, you can find us @Ink2Film on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And also, if you wanted to send us feedback, we actually have a Gmail, ink2film@gmail.com, and you can send us comments, concerns, feedback, as well as any sort of information you wanted to send us about our next upcoming project, Howl's Moving Castle.
Absolutely. And if you enjoyed this episode and you would like for us to keep going, the best way you can do that is to support us by subscribing or leaving us a review. A review like this review from Cherry Magnolia on iTunes, 5 stars. In the middle of the second episode, you guys are talking so calmly about a story that gives me a visceral reaction anytime I see Pennywise as an adult is kinda awesome. LOL. Great job so far. So that came to us during our It coverage.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. We love to hear from our listeners. We also wanted to thank Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music, and also Audible. If you guys wanted to get that 30-day free trial and 1 free credit for an audiobook, you can go to our affiliate link, audibletrial.com/ink2film.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I'm excited to get into our next project. Until then, I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
See you guys.